Welcome to Vermont Artists and Authors, where we interview great storytellers and artists from the amazing Green Mountain State. This is episode 9. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the inspirational and acclaimed author of the book, If I Die Before I Wake, A Caregiver's Journey, Eli Shaw. Eli, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Great. And it's like, so you go Eli or Bob, so we'll let you kind of steer that boat on what you
you can call me Bob. Yeah,
okay.
Everybody around here knows me as Bob, and but the reason why, I'll tell you a quick story. The reason why I got to become Eli Shaw was in the book. There are there's about 12 accounts of people who had passed. They were part of a photo exhibit that I did that went national. And what I did was I took a portrait of the person who was HIV positive, and then they wrote their story, and I put the story and the picture in the same frame. And it was at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine for about 6 months. And then it went across country, I guess twice. I can't remember now, but it was all over the place. And finally, it came back, and when I talked to them, they said I could use their story in a book if I ever wrote one, because I told them I always wanted to write a book. So I started putting them in the book, and then I had to contact some of their relatives to make sure that was, they knew what was happening. And most of them were very upset because they didn't want anybody to know that they had a son or a daughter who died of AIDS or substance abuse or was gay or whatever. So I decided I was just going to use their initials or their first name. And one of the parents said, well, listen, if they know you and they know the story, they're going to know who it is. And so I said, okay. So I called my publisher, and she said, now it's time for a pen name. So she says, figure out a pen name. So I used my middle name and the last part of my last name. So
oh, cool. So yeah, and we're going to talk about your book in a little bit, but first we wanted to. So you have a pretty fascinating story on how you decided to sit down and produce this book, and the book came out in 2019. It's as I say, you've made a lot of sales. People like it. You have a publisher with it, but talk to us about the impetus of this book. What made you decide to sit down and write this?
Well, in 1992, I had been taking care of actually, I was taking care of my father long distance. He had heart problems, and he ended up going into the hospital for a surgery. Unfortunately, the surgery went bad. Well, the surgery was good, but he ended up spitting up his breathing tube, I guess. And then he went into a coma. So I was kind of like long distance between my sister and I, trying to, be the caregiver type thing. And I was also taking care of my next door neighbor who had a stroke, and she was in her 90s, and I was living in New York at the time. And then my roommate, who was, he was, I think it was in 1980 something, he became HIV positive. So I ended up becoming his caregiver, and one thing led to another. And then within a 3-month or 4-month, about 4-month period, all three of them had passed away. And when the first two died, it was like I still had somebody else to take care of. So that was fine. And then when the last one, when Mark passed away, it was like I hit a sort of a brick wall. My emotions just went all over the place. I felt numb. I didn't really know what to do with myself because I had been taking care of people for so long. And actually, I started to realize that I had been a caregiver since I was about 10 years old. And I was kind of not feeling very, very, very good about everything. And a friend of mine who was a psychiatrist, I called him up one day and I said, I told him what was happening to me. And he said, well, let's go out and get drunk. Come on. So we went out, and we had quite a few beers at the time. And I kind of spilled my guts out. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you just start writing all your emotions down, everything you can think of that brought you to this point, and get all your feelings on paper. Just kind of write as much down as possible. So I did, and about 6 months later, I saw him again. I gave him the notebook I had been writing in, and about 6 weeks later, he called me up and he said, "You need to write a book." And so I talked to him for quite a while about it, and he explained to me what he meant. And he said, "You've got so much here that has so much to do with everyday life and how we deal with things, how we deal with our children, how we deal with our parents who are, elderly and whatnot, and what it's, all the struggles of being a caregiver." And the struggle I had when I was a caregiver in New York was that there really wasn't anything. This is in the 1980s and 90s. And there really wasn't anything out there except for hospital or technical doctor's books or nursing books or whatever that could give me any indication of what it's like to be a caregiver of somebody you really love. And so I kind of, felt at a loss for a long time. And then while I was at the library, I figured, those two big lions in New York City in front of the library, I figured anything that magnificent has got to have the book for me. So I went in and I talked to a couple of people there, and one guy, they all said there was just mostly technical books. There wasn't anything, no memoirs or anything like that could think of. So finally, when one of the librarians came up to me and said, "You might think I'm crazy, but I think I've got a book, and if you can bear with me and figure out a way of translating it so that it'll be translated into taking care of a human being, then this might work for you." So I got the book, and the book was called Caring for Your Pet. And after I read it, I started to realize that there were so many times when you take care of your pet, you have to know what the PB dance is. You have to know what the I want to go out dance is, I'm hungry dance. And when you're taking care of somebody you really love, you have to know what they want. And a lot of times they can't really tell you, or they're just so weak and they really don't have any energy to tell you what they really need. And so what I had to do is kind of translate that whole thing into being a caregiver and trying to find out what are the needs of the people. Like with Mark, he had a problem with his throat, so he couldn't really talk that much. So he would start, I told him, I said, pat your stomach if you're hungry. And finally I just said, listen, if you got to go to the bathroom that bad, just grab your crotch and I'll, get you down there. But it was just all these different things that I had to come up with. And I had to realize, like, I could tell when he was tired. I could tell when he was hungry. Eventually I could tell when he needed to get up and just kind of like sit down for a while. So I had to find out what those dances were. And after I realized that, I started to realize most of my life, since I was 10, which is when I met my first friend who had Down syndrome. In those days, they called it mongoloidism. And I told my mother I got a Chinese friend now because they just moved into the neighborhood. So she said, invite him over. So I did. And afterwards, she asked me to help her dry the dishes, which I knew that was a cue for me either getting a lecture or she had to talk to me about something, like a captive audience type thing. So she explained to me what it was. And then I looked up mongoloidism. And at 10 years old, I found out that Mongolia was right near China. So that was okay. So, I have a Mongolian friend now. So that made it okay for me at 10 years old. And then I started to realize that some of the kids in the neighborhood were bullying him, or they would make fun of him. And it really bothered me that was happening. So I would kind of jump in and I would be the one that would get beat up, or I would just say, Charlie, just run. And then we would both run. And what happened after that was I was going to camp. And I asked him if he was going to go to camp, and he said that they don't take people like me. So, which I didn't quite understand at that time. But when I came back from camp, he had moved away. His father was in the service, I think, and he had been redeployed somewhere. So I felt like I was a failure. And apparently I told my mother that I wanted to do something to change the way people treated people like Charlie. And I didn't really remember that, but she told me one day that that's what I had told her. And about 7 years later, I was working with a group called Senior Teens Against Retardation at that time. Now it's called Senior Teens Aid Recreation. And it's teenagers who work with people with disabilities, kids with disabilities, and they take them out bowling on weekends and whatever. And so I was working with that group, and one of the kids there said something about his brother going to camp. And I said, "Are you going to go?" And he said, "No, they don't take people like me," which is almost exactly the same phrase that I heard from Charlie. So I decided in my infinite wisdom that I was going to create a camp. And so I spent the next 2 years in my brain. And I think I had a bit of autism and ADD at the time, because I spent so many hours by myself in my brain creating this thing, and people were just non-existent around me, even though there might have been people there. My brain was just, intact, doing what I had to do. And in 1969, we had our first camp. We had 30 teenagers and 60 kids with disabilities. It was called Camp Happiness, which is spelled wrong because I can't spell, and or half the time I can't spell. And so that started, and now it's 50 years later, and it's happening. So all of those things in 1992, I started to realize that all of those things that I did had something to do with caring for a pet, caring for my family, caring for myself, caring for friends, caring for people that I was working with, caring for my job. Everything I did had some sort of care to it. And whether it be medical care or whatever, it was still my job to be the caregiver of whatever domain I was in at that point. And over the years, I started to realize that there was really nothing out there to speak of that could help anybody. And I had talked to so many people, and I found out in the late 90s, I was working with a program for HIV and AIDS at the time. And I found out that there were so many people who were caregivers, and it could be the son of somebody who had AIDS, or the daughter of somebody who had AIDS, or it could be a relative or even a friend. And they were all caregivers, but they didn't know how to do it, and they had to just jump in with no orientation, no feedback from anybody. They had to just jump in and do it on their own. And as I became more professional in my caregiving and became a PCA, and I worked in the school, I was working with kids who just couldn't function in the classroom, and I would take them out of the classroom and let them scream if they wanted to or whatever, and then we got to work and got their work done. And I had some techniques that I used eventually that I was told that were really unusual, but somehow they worked. And which was when I first met the student, I wouldn't talk to the student for about a week. I would just give them the information and then, let them do what they had to do. And I would sit in the corner and read a magazine until they were done. And then when their papers were done, I would check them out and I say, "Okay, you're on your own." And finally, after about a week or so, one of them, I had to laugh because one of them wouldn't speak for quite a while. And all of a sudden he asked me a question, and I said, "Holy crap, you can speak. You've got a voice." And I was like, and I did my my Three Stooges, woo, 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 whatever. And hey Mo, check it out, and they were just like cracking up. And all of a sudden I got the attention of this kid who just hated school, and now he loved it. And it was just one of those things that, we have a communication now. And it it took about a couple of weeks to get him to talk more and more about what was really, egging him on to keep acting up in class. And we talked a lot about that. And eventually, within a month or two, he was able to go back to class. But it was like all these different things. I had to create all these things in my head. I was left on my own with all these things to do, which I had been doing most of my life. The camp, running a camp, or helping to run a camp for HIV and AIDS. It was just whenever I saw there was an injustice or something wasn't right, I tried to do something about it. And I did it kind of in a spectacular way or whatever, because I thought that would make the difference, And
So talk to us a bit about, Bob, when you sat down and wrote that. You said you had a lot of notes and came together, and your friend said, put this into a book. At what point did it go from you writing this as a kind of like a passion project, or as kind of like a, self-therapy in a way, to write this down as a journal? Was there like there was a specific decision to say, well, did you have to tweak it at all to make it more applicable for people to read it as an advice book or a storybook or like an autobiography? How would you describe that?
Well, when I first started the idea of writing an actual book, I didn't know how to write a book. I was like, I was a novice. I couldn't even spell that good. And it was kind of one of these things where I would travel on the train from Stamford, Connecticut to New York City. And as I'm on the train, I always brought a notebook with me, and I would just sit there and just start writing. I would think of something. For example, somebody mentioned to me once about, they asked me how I could handle being the caregiver of 3 people and whatnot. So I decided, okay, that's a good subject. Let me write about that. So I did. And that became one chapter. And then eventually everything I did became a new chapter. I met, when I was working with the HIV and AIDS programs, I started to write about a program that I started called Legacy, which is my next book, actually. And Legacy was it started out because people who were HIV positive were dying, and they didn't want to die and become just a statistic or a number, just like we're going through now with COVID. People are just becoming statistics or numbers. We only count how many have died, but very seldom we talk about who they were or what their story was. And there's some amazing people out there who have passed away. So I talked to quite a few of them about it. And for about a year, I kind of like milled around in my mind about what we could do about it. So I created a program, and I realized that you have to know what your legacy is before you can start creating a legacy. So the first question in the program is, if I were to die today, how would you be remembered, or what would your legacy be? And then you go around and ask people, your relatives or whatever, and come up with a list. And then the second question is, if I were to die today, how would you like to be remembered? And that way you can kind of tweak things around to say, well, I've always been a nice person. I'd like to be known as the guy next door who was really nice about everything, or whatever, kind or whatever. And the third question is, knowing the answer to those questions, what is it you need to create that? What are some of the tools you need? Well, the book was my tool. So when I started talking about legacy, I started to realize that the book is actually my tool. And so I wrote a whole chapter, and I'm actually writing a whole book on legacy and the program Legacy. And during that time, one of my clients' sons, who was my first camper at one of the camps for HIV, or for families with HIV, and he decided that I was going to be his best friend. So we became friends, and whatnot. He was only 9. And when his mother kept on going into rehab and whatnot, he ended up coming over to my house. And one day he kind of said, you know, I want you to be my dad, or didn't say it that way, but I want you to take care of me. And his mother on her deathbed said the same thing. Make sure that Homer's okay. You're the one that, you know, is the closest to him. Make sure he does well. Well, eventually he tells everybody now, he's 36 years old now. I've got a grandson and a granddaughter from him. And he tells everybody that he adopted me. So, but those are the stories. And it's all part of caregiving. I'm caring for him. I'm caring for his mother. He's actually caring for me now. So there's a whole turnaround story in that, which is really amazing to me anyway. And so when it became interesting to do the book, it was about 1999, I believe, 1997, 99. And I started to really look at it like a book. And I tried to come up with chapters and all this stuff. Well, for the last 25 years, I had been trying to get it published, and nobody wants to talk about HIV anymore. Nobody was interested in caregiving. It's not a saleable product. It was a subject that people were kind of avoiding, and because it has a lot to do with death and dying, and also caring for people who are not responsive and stuff like that. So, you know, most of the publishers that I went to said that, well, it's not really a good subject to publish right now. You know, nobody really wants to read about that, which is actually almost true, because of going through from 2000 on, it was like everybody was worried about other things going on, and caregiving wasn't really the issue. Right now, it's like the biggest issue going, one of them anyway. And so, anyway, I decided that the only way I'm going to do this is if I self-publish. So I found a publishing company that would self-publish it with me.
Do you feel that you know, this past year has been really tremendous on caregivers? Do you see an increased interest in your book, and is this why subsequently you're looking at making kind of a follow-up book for this?
Yeah, a year ago or 2 years ago now, I would, you know, talk to people about the caregiving book, and If I Die Before I Wake one night, and explain to them what it was. And I got some, you know, good response, and it was mostly teachers or nurses, people who were, you know, thinking about going into nursing, or they were in school for nursing. And I started trying to promote it through all the nursing schools, and trying to get that going, which took forever to get going. And then once I got it once I was ready to get it going, COVID came in and everything got shut down. So it was like, nobody's going to be looking for my little card that says, if I die before I wake, you really need to read this book. You know? So, what I'm finding now is everybody I talk to, I've got my card with me, and every time I talk to somebody and I tell them about the book, they're all, it seems like everybody that I talk to has somebody they know that either could read it, could use it, or they could use it themselves because they're taking care of their father. But what I saw was that there were so many people out there who were losing people, who knew people who were ill, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to help them. They didn't know what to give them. And that goes for neighbors. I mean, I was locked up in this house, pretty much by myself for the whole quarantine thing there, the whole lockdown. And it was amazing because I got to meet all my neighbors. There was so many people I didn't know existed around here, and we were sharing recipes. We were sending over food for each other. You know, one of my neighbors at one point was living in my house while I was away because they were homeless. And when I came back, they were going to go back and live in the car. And I said, no, you're going to stay here. And then I found a place right across the street. So she and I, she's got 4 kids and whatnot. So we all got together and just, we shot off different things or whatever, like for 4th of July, I watched them do their sparklers or whatever. And, we became a community for the first time that I didn't even know I had, and neighbors that I knew before, but I didn't even know they lived near me. So it was like, it was a whole different experience in that way. And I think during COVID really made people more aware. So whenever I show them the card, the first thing they see is a caregiver's, if I die before I wake, but when they see a caregiver's journey, it clicks right away. Oh my God, I should read this because, I'm taking care of my father now. He just had COVID, or he's been in the nursing home for so long and we couldn't get him out, or whatever.
So what would you say, Bob? What's some of the advice that you would give to caregivers who might not, as you said, you've been a trained caregiver for 20 plus years. What would be some advice that you would give for caregivers that they might find in your book?
I think the first thing is, if you're a caregiver and you're taking care of anybody, whether it's your relatives or next door neighbor or a friend or whatever, or if you're a professional and you're going through a lot of stress, most of the being exhausted, you kind of lose a lot of the techniques, or you don't use some of the techniques you would normally use as a caregiver. One of the main things I found is that, I could go into Nathan's room, and I had the worst day in the world, and I would say, "Hey Nathan, how you doing? Oh man, what a lousy day I had today," and I would start spieling off. Well, he would kind of look at me and say, "You want to talk about a lousy day? I've been laying here for the whole day looking at this freaking ceiling," and I started to, when things like that started to come up, I started to realize I need to find out what his needs are. I have to go in with my baggage outside the door. And then if he asks me about my baggage, I'll tell him. But when I walk in, that's his room. That's his life. I'm caring for them. They're not caring for me, although they are at times. They do care for you. They try not to be as ill or act as ill sometimes because they know that stresses you out or whatever. But one of the main things is find out what the needs are of the person that you're caring for. Come up with some sort of a communication with that person, and be very aware of those things when you're taking care of somebody. I remember being in the hospital with a friend of mine, and he had diverticulitis, and every so often he would just, either the bag would let go or he would let go, whichever. And one of the nurses came in, and the first thing she said, "Oh my God, not again." And my first thought was, I want to punch her, I mean, if somebody said that to me, I would feel like crap. I'm sorry, excuse my language, but I just, when you walk in and somebody's in the hospital, or somebody's in a bed in their room or in the house or whatever, or if you're in a group home or whatever, you try to use as much compassion and kindness as you can, because they don't know what you've gone through all day, but you don't know what they've gone through all day either. And it's probably a hell of a lot worse, or it's probably something you would never want to go through. So be the person when you walk in and you talk to somebody. Like when I would walk into Nathan's room, I'd say, "Nathan, oh man, it's so great to see you again. How you doing?" And he would just cheer up. He could have been mad at his mother or something, and he would all of a sudden cheer up, and he was just, his eyes were up. And I always found out some of the things he liked, even though he couldn't talk very well. I found out he loved church music, because I used to take him to church once in a while. And he would sit in his wheelchair in the middle of the aisle, right? And he was the only one out of tune, but he was the loudest one too. And he just, when they would have soloists up there, he would sing with the soloist. I mean, and the whole congregation loved it. And I didn't realize how much he really connected with church music or organ music. And then one day we were watching TV, and it happened to be a church service on there or whatever. And so we were watching it for a little while, and all of a sudden he starts singing with the hymns and just wailing away and just going. He was just so inspired by this. And the other song that he loved was "You Raise Me Up." And that was his favorite song. So I found all these different songs that, or the different music that he liked. And we would sit there, turn off the TV, and I'd get my cell phone or computer, and I'd put on some music for him. And it just changed this whole world. He was just in heaven right now. And I think that's what we need to do as a caregiver. We need to change things so that it's livable, not, oh God, I got to change you again or something. You're trying to make their condition at least livable or sustainable at that time. And a lot of us don't do that. I've been involved with so many professional caregivers programs, and it's a job. That's it. Yeah.
So talk to us a bit about, as you mentioned, you're working on another book. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, actually, I've got two books. One is The Camp that I'm in. That's going to be my third book. And then and after that, I've got one on the line that I want to write a book about Nathan. He was the one that just passed away. I was his caregiver for 27 years. So we were really close, and he knew me like a book. I knew him like a book. And I'm writing a children's book, and it's called Nate the Great, because everybody used to call him Nate the Great. He was always smiling. He was always cheering people up. And what I'm doing is I'm writing the book, the children's book, through Nathan's eyes. In other words, the world through Nathan's eyes and how he saw it. But the next book I'm writing, it's at the editors right now. It's the one about legacy, and it's basically how I came about getting the program started and what legacy is about, and the fact that everything we do, we leave a legacy. It's the same thing as caregiving. We care for everything, but if I run down the street and start screaming, that's a legacy. Everybody's going to remember that. If I walk down the street and I shake hands with everybody and just greet them and just say, have a great day, that's a legacy. There was a guy who became super senior in Randolph. He used to walk around the hospital and just say, God loves you, and I love you too. He was like in his 80s or 90s, and he was they called him Sarge, and he walked around. His legacy still stands there. I mean, he's gone. He passed away, but everybody remembers Sarge, and every so often you'll see somebody come up to you and say, God loves you, and we do too. And it just kind of, it brings you back to, people actually create legacies that can carry on. And right now I'm leaving a legacy for my grandson, who's only 2. I'm 72, and I'll be 73 in August. And I don't think I'm going to be around. I may be around, but I may not know I'm around. But if he graduates from high school, I may not know it, and I may not be around or healthy enough to really interact with him and leave a legacy with him. So what I'm doing now is every morning I get up and I talk to him on video here. He doesn't, I'm talking to him as if he were 20 years old, because I started doing it and said, "Hey, Sammy, how you doing?" And I figured if he saw it when he was 20, he was probably think I'm an idiot. So I decided to talk to him normal. And what I'm doing is I'm talking to him about who I am, about my book, about what I've done in my life. I talked to him about COVID, what that did for me, because he lived through that at 2 years old. So I talk to him about that, my relationship with his father, how that came about. I give him advice sometimes, or I'll think of something and go, wow, I should talk to Sammy about that. And I'm doing the same thing with my granddaughter too. She's 16, but I'm not going to give it to her until later on. And what I'm doing is I'm accumulating them all and putting them on like a zip drive, whatever you call external drive. And that way he'll have that for as long as you want. And the reason I do that now is because I remember my father so well, but I would love to have some sort of a video of him talking to me, or a video of us talking, or maybe, or something that, I mean, I've got pictures and I got a few films that I've, seen him, but his voice I still have in my head, but that's fading sometimes. And and I always wanted to, my mother and I used to talk every single day till the day she died. And that was the legacy she gave me, because we always had that connection. But I would love to have a recording of that, or a video of that, of seeing them talking to me and stuff like that. So so it's basically, the legacy book is basically who we are as human beings, and how we relate to each other on a daily basis. And it all has to do with the legacies we leave. It's like Hansel and Gretel leaving the cookies, crackers and whatnot. And sometimes the birds come and pick up those legacies that we've left, and they don't exist anymore. And sometimes legacies come up and bite us in the butt that we don't like. And those are going to be the ones that stick with us. And unfortunately, that's the way life is. And that's why it's so important to be doing the right things during your life, I guess. And the book, what it does is, in the end, it gives you an opportunity to find things that you can do, like writing letters to your relatives and then leaving them when you die, or even before you die. Coming up with ideas. I write poetry all the time, and I write, when someone passes away, I write a legacy poem for that person every time. And in the book, I've got about 10 of those in there, and it'll give you a good example of what I'm talking about. I've met so many people who have Alzheimer's, and I followed several people through that experience of having Alzheimer's, and it's long term. You don't notice it. You don't notice the different changes and stuff like that. So I wrote a poem, and it's called Alzheimer's 101 in 12 hours. And so it starts out, well, I lost my key, I can't find it, and your wife or somebody finds the key for you, and you go, okay. And then you get up and you go for a drive, and you can't, you don't recognize a few faces or whatever. And then you go to an event or whatever, and somebody comes up and you don't quite recognize that person, but they've known you forever. And it goes on and on. You eventually get home, and you sit in a chair, and you don't remember that room very well. And then your wife says, go up. Why don't you go upstairs and get ready for bed? Well, you go upstairs, but you go into somebody else's room because you don't know which room you're supposed to be in. And then you go up, she goes up, and she says, oh, come on, go into the bedroom. And eventually it gets to the point where he feels uncomfortable undressing in front of somebody he doesn't know. And now he's going to go to bed with that person. And then you put your head on the pillow, and then you disappear. And it's like, it goes through a whole series of those things. That's kind of a brief thing of it. But I sent it to the Alzheimer's Association, and they've used it quite a bit now, because it really it kind of gives you a really quick, brief summary of what Alzheimer's really does, and how it can be devastating to you. So,
because you almost wear two hats, Bob. You wear, well, three, like the autobiographical part where you just want to tell your story. There's a part where you kind of act as a teacher to caregivers, but there's also a point where you feel like you have to tell the stories of the people that you worked with in the past. Which one kind of stands out most for you?
Well, I wouldn't have the book if it weren't for the people I was working with. So they have taught me more. I've learned so much from all the people that I've cared for. And they have taught me so much. And I think that's, as far as that part of it, knowing them is one of the most important things. And the part about caregiving, I don't know it all. I don't know everything about caregiving. There's a lot of things I still need to learn too. I've worked with certain types of people or certain situations and whatnot. And also in the schools. And there's also a lot of different ways to deal with students that are not, that I need to, if I went back into the school system, I would probably have to learn more about. So there's, I don't know it all. What I can say is that in the book, I can only tell you and explain to you and tell you about my experiences, about what I have learned. And I've learned a lot. I mean, just the whole idea of compassion, and being. There was a program called EST in the 90s, and I joined it. And one of the programs was Be Here Now, and I didn't understand Be Here Now until probably around 20 years later, about 6 or 7 years ago. And I realized that I can't do anything about the future. I can do something to maybe affect the future, but I can't do anything about it. What's going to happen in the future is going to happen. And I can't do anything about the past. And, the past is basically my instruction book or my social studies book or whatever, my education book about where I am right now. And so being here now, the only thing I can do is change the word that I'm going to say right now. Right now. That's the only thing I can change. What I said just a few seconds ago, I can't change that now. That's gone, unless you edit it. But what I can't do now also is I can't change the future, but I can affect it or alter it in some way. For example, right now I told you I have a lot of furniture in my living room. I could affect the future of my living room by just going out there and deciding right now, which is being here now, to go and change and get rid of all that furniture and make it a seatable place. And that will change the future of that living room and my future. But I have to do it as being here now. Right. I can't do it, I can't say, okay, future, this is what you're going to look like, And that changed so much about who I have been and who I am now, and what I do. Like my grandfather told me a long time ago, if you find an opportunity and you look at it and it sounds something you'd like to do, study it, look at it, discuss it with yourself or others, chew it up, spit it out, and then do it. Because if you do it, you're going to know if you're going to fail or not. If you don't do it, you're never going to know what's going to happen out of it. And you may regret it.
Well, thank you very much. So we're at the top of the hour already. Wow, this was quick, huh? So tell people where they can find your book. So is Amazon the best spot, or is there another?
So you can get it on Amazon. Look up If I Die Before I Wake, A Caregiver's Journey, and it's under Eli Shaw, which is my pen name. And if I can give you my email too, if you want. And it's BKERSHAW 5607 @gmail.com, and send me an email, and we can maybe work out something. You send me a check, I'll send you the book.
And as I say, you have your legacy book is going to be it's with the editor now. Mm-hmm. You have a children's book in the process as well, Nate the Great. Mm-hmm. So make sure you come back on the show to talk about your book when your second book comes out.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been a true pleasure, Bob. I really appreciate it.
There's so much good out there, and I tend to see it all the time, and a lot of people don't. And
it's there. You know what? As you say, if you look at it, if you look for the good in the world, you're going to find it. So
that's true. That's true.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, and appreciate it.